Hello ladies, gentlemen, and comrades against the binary, my name is Sorio99, and welcome to my ranking of every Zelda game. Before we start, a few notes. First off, this is one of two videos I'm making about the Zelda series alongside a full in-depth analysis of each game. If you haven't watched that video, I don't blame you, it's long as hell, but I'd greatly appreciate it if you did. If you don't fully understand any of these rankings, feel free to consult that video for more detail. Secondly, like in that video, while the title says every game in the series, there are some notable exceptions. Namely, I'm not covering either of the Hyrule Warriors games, Triforce Heroes, Cadence of Hyrule, Link's Crossbow Training, or any of the CDI games. I'm also not going to rank any of the Japanese exclusive titles like the Satellaview games or Navi Trackers. I'm only looking at the main series entries plus Four Swords and Four Swords Adventures. Thirdly, with two exceptions, I'm specifically looking at the most recent version of each game available. For example, I'm ranking Link's Awakening on Switch, not Game Boy or Game Boy Color, and Four Swords Anniversary Edition as opposed to the original GBA side mode. However, for a game like Link to the Past, which received a full GBA remake with some new content, but was ported to Switch more recently from the SNES version, I'm specifically looking at that Switch port. The two exceptions, however, are the N64 games, who I'm ranking the Switch ports of. I'm also looking at the 3DS remakes of those two games, since they're in somewhat of a gray area of which qualifies, plus Majora's Mask 3D in particular has some very noteworthy changes. That should be about it, so with the housekeeping out of the way, let's start with the absolute worst game in the series. Look, I'm pretty sure this game is already the longest section of the other video, so I'll keep this one short. Four Swords Adventures sucks. A lot. It suffers an identity crisis within the first 10 minutes, then continues sputtering forward with it for the next few hours. I can appreciate the idea of experimenting with the Zelda formula, but to truly embrace an experimental spirit, you need to be able to admit when an experiment doesn't work. And no, I don't think it's just because I played it in single player. Could that have made it worse? Yes, but I really don't think subjecting other people to this game would have made it that much better. Oh, and don't tell me, oh, you probably just sucked at it and that's why you hate it. I finished this game in 2 seatings, all by myself, with almost 75 extra lives left. If anything, the game is pathetically easy. And keep in mind, I'm a Kirby fan saying that. It's definitely not as bad as its sequel, but that doesn't mean I loved Four Swords. To be fair, it's not exactly fair to judge this game alongside all the other Zelda games. It was never intended to be its own independent video game. It was a side mode and a remake of Link to the Past. The Anniversary Edition does a decent job of expanding it to last longer, plus making it playable in single player. It even adds in a pretty damn fun level in the form of the Realm of Memories. Unfortunately, it also added in the Hero's Trial, which has all the enemy spam and unfun bullshit of Four Swords Adventures, but without the formations that make those sections of that game so pathetically easy. Plus, if you want to fight the true final boss, you need to play through every level at least 3 times, collecting absurd numbers of rupees along the way. Like, it's not a terrible experience, for the most part, but, well, 1, it's not a real Zelda game by any definition, and 2, it's only a side mode that then got released as a downloadable game for like a month max. Overall, not terrible, but personally, I'll stick to Triforce Heroes. Finally getting into the actual no-controversy mainline Zelda games, and the games I had an even slightly positive experience with, Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link is certainly a different kind of Zelda game. The closest any other entry has ever come to it is certain sections of Link's Awakening, but even then the series has never touched the RPG mechanics of leveling up and random encounters since. That's probably why so many label this as the worst game in the series, at least excluding the CDI games. Hell, even Miyamoto was disappointed with it. And yeah, it's not amazing, but I think that's more because it's an old NES game that ended up being an oddball entry than any actual flaws in the game itself. The game is hard, brutally so, and it definitely doesn't feel like a fair difficulty. Enemies will end up hitting you without any way of dodging or blocking all the time. Some enemies absolutely require magic spells, which use a magic bar that feels way too small for how often it's required, and my god, the Iron Knuckles are pains in the ass. However, I think the combat actually feels better in general than original Zelda, being a lot more skill-based. The spells are all pretty clever, the side-scrolling feels decent, and the overworld exploration works pretty damn well. Is it great? No. But I think it's better than a lot of people often treat it, hence why it's the lowest ranked mainline game. Hey, I said it wasn't great. Yeah, I like Zelda 2 more than most, but I still think the original Legend of Zelda is better, if only slightly. This is a very unique entry in the series, even now. It's the basic foundation every subsequent game in the series was built upon. Its basic gameplay is still how 2D Zelda works. Hell, it's one of the few NES games ever to include a save system, at least in America. It is genuinely impressive. But that doesn't make it all that good. I'd say that by the third entry, the Zelda series had already trumped this original entry in terms of quality, and with Link Between Worlds and Breath of the Wild being even less linear, even that isn't a unique selling point for this game. The things that are unique feel more weird than they do entertaining. Arrows not existing as actual items, and instead just subtracting 1 rupee per shot. The one roadblock in one dungeon in the main quest which requires a random item that otherwise doesn't serve much of a purpose. Even the keys being transferred between dungeons like a standard collectible item only appears here. It does technically give the game more of a unique identity, but none of it makes the game any more fun, so it just feels like loose ends, which later entries rightly cut. Add in some unfair moments like the tougher enemies and the invisible final boss, and the game is far from the best in the series. It's closer to one of the worst. But then again, I guess that's a good sign for the series as a whole, isn't it? You know, I grew up with the DS Zelda games, so I have more tolerance for their bullshit than most, but I still think Phantom Hourglass is one of the worst in the series. I don't think it was necessarily inevitable. The DS has more than enough tech to make a great 2D Zelda game. Hell, since they remade Mario 64 on it, they could probably have given us a halfway decent 3D Zelda on the system. Instead, they decided to prioritize being innovative over being fun. Controlling Link with the touchscreen is something you can get used to for sure. The controls work decently enough for moving around. However, with every action and item requiring the touchscreen, it limits what you can do so much that you can't even attack in front of you and walk at the same time. Add the mindless and uninteractive sailing gameplay, and the game just doesn't feel fun to actively play. And that's not even touching on the almost non-existent story, which would be forgivable if it weren't the second game in a trilogy where the other two have some of the most fun stories in the franchise. Are there positives? For sure. I think the dungeons are well built, the map drawing mechanic is a lot of fun and used in some very creative ways, and I really like the way they use the grappling hook here. Being able to use it to slingshot and reflect, plus tightrope walk is all very cool. Otherwise, I don't know. It's not necessarily unfun, but it's not even close to my favorite game in the series. Decent attempt, but maybe try again later. Look, I don't think technical limitations inherently make games worse, but well, they definitely don't help. And that's one of the main things holding Oracle of Seasons back, honestly. With only 2 buttons to use, one of which is usually going to be occupied by the sword, the game feels limited in what it can even try to do. On its own, that would be fine, but, well, the game feels by far like the weaker of the 2 Oracle games. The dungeons are unmemorable, most of the bosses are rehashes of bosses from previous entries in the series, and outside of the magnetic gloves, which are genuinely interesting, the items just don't hold that much interest compared to the equivalents from Ages. The story is also pretty weak, with only a couple characters really playing much of a role, and the main villain very much being an off-screen presence for most of the game. Add on top the lower emphasis on puzzles, which for me are some of the best parts of the Zelda game, and the result is a fairly weak entry overall. It's not all terrible, of course. The seasons mechanic is decently interesting, the items are well used for how uninteresting they may be, and while it's not my personal cup of tea, I know the ring system in the game definitely has its fans. Plus, while it doesn't help it with regards to Oracle of Ages, which has the same system, I think the seeds of the two are genuinely interesting. Heck, in Seasons you get access to the seeds more easily and earlier than Ages, so really the system is at its most fun in this game. However, at the end of the day, the game is just weaker than most of the others. Oh well, at least the linking stuff is super cool. Ah, now this is better. Spirit Tracks may be a weird entry for a lot of people, but personally I think it's a major step up from Phantom Hourglass. The controls are mostly the same, unfortunately, so I can't rank it that much higher, but the items are more interesting in general just off the start. We have an instrument, which is fun to play if you're good at it, and gets used in a few fun ways across the game. The train driving system is a lot more dynamic and fun than the sailing in Phantom Hourglass, at least for me, since you can change directions at junctions manually, with the line you draw to your destination being less of your concrete movement and more of a helpful guide and useful autopilot. The dungeons are much more distinct, as are the bosses, which I definitely appreciate. Plus, we have an actually interesting story, which is a first for this list's order at least. Some hardcore fans may have some issues with this game's plot, with the new Hyrule, a new villain, and some of the lore implications, but personally I think it's one of the more fun stories in the series. I mean, what other Zelda game does a joke like Burn walking out while Link and Zelda have a moment together? It's great! But I'd be lying if I'd said it was everything I'd want. For one, like I mentioned, it uses the same engine and controls as Phantom Hourglass, so all the issues with the controls I mentioned there still apply here. Plus, the game is pretty darn short. There's one fewer dungeon than Phantom Hourglass, and while there is side content to enjoy, I was able to finish it all off without too much hassle. Still, definitely worth a look if you're a fan of the series, just get ready for some unconventional controls. Oh boy, am I gonna get shit for this one? Look, A Link to the Past is absolutely a good game. We don't have the same annoyances as in Zelda 1, the items are all useful in one way or another, we have the start of the series taking story seriously, and the gameplay basically feels like the latest 2D Zelda games, all on the SNES. But the problem is, there's not much else making this game any better than those other games. I guess that having a button for the Pegasus boots instead of it being an equipable item makes it more convenient than the Game Boy or even Game Boy Advance games, but because one of the face buttons is a special map button, we still only have one item usable at a time. Beyond that, some of the dungeons are interesting, I guess the Dark World mechanic is interesting, and, well, some of the items are interesting? I like the Cane of Samaria, and I find it funny that there are two different items that are used to protect Link. In general, though, the game just isn't all that notable. It's fine, it's fun to play, and it doesn't have any major game-wide problems, but it also doesn't have all that much setting it apart from later games that have outdone it over time. The most notable thing in my mind about Link to the Past is just the weird things about it that come from it being the third entry ever. The story, which doesn't gel well with the rest of the franchise, the big keys also opening the item chests, and the scene where Link prays for a god to strike down a barrier blocking a dungeon? Alright, whatever. I know some people hold this game up as an exemplar, but for me it's just kinda an okay game. Sorry, my list, my rules. Was this game worth playing both of the Four Swords games beforehand? Probably not. Still, the Minish Cap is a pretty solid game, with some very fun ideas. I love pretty much every item in the game, the Kinstone system is a very original way of unlocking content, and my lord, the idea of shrinking and exploring the world as a tiny creature is incredibly cool. Seriously, I don't think I gave that enough of a spotlight in the main analysis video. The Minish mechanic is incredibly well executed. Transforming standard enemies like Choo-Choos and Octoroks into major bosses, making enemies out of ladybugs and flies, and even having dungeon set pieces like a massive barrel you walk inside. Add how it recontextualizes the overworld with so many locations having either a secret miniature location or just various obstacles that change with your size, and the shrinking is ridiculously good. Aside from that, it's alright. It's definitely a decent game, arguably the best entry made by Flagship, but it's very standard and pretty darn short on top of that. Like, most of the 2D Zeldas are shorter than the 3D entries to be sure, but compared to the Oracle games, Minish Cap is as small as, well, the Minish. Don't get me wrong, I can enjoy a smaller game on occasion, but it does leave the whole thing feeling a little insubstantial. Still, easily the best game in the Four Swords trilogy. Okay, if I wasn't gonna get hate mail for number 13, I definitely am for ranking a game some people still describe as the best video game ever below the top 10. Look, Ocarina of Time is a classic, I don't think anyone would argue against that. But let's be real here, it hasn't exactly aged like wine. Every port past the original N64 has mapped the item buttons to the right stick as well as 4 of the Ocarina buttons, the camera gets caught uncomfortably often, the controls, even just for walking, feel slow, 2 crucial items require going into the pause menu and navigating to gear anytime you want to use them or stop using them, the Spirit Temple boss sucks, the Water Temple is universally hated, and like with Zelda 1 and Link to the Past, when every single 3D game since has done incredibly similar things but better and with more advanced tech, it's difficult to say this game is actually worth playing. I don't hate it absolutely, but honestly, if you're gonna play the original N64 game, or any of the console ports, all I can say is, good luck. I hope you like it more than I did. Well, I'm willing to bet a lot of you were expecting this sometime earlier, huh? Is it fair to rank Oracle of Ages this much higher than so many other games? Well, here's the thing. Yes. I think Ages is not only easily the better of the Oracle games, but also easily the best game Flagship made for the Zelda series, and as you can tell if you're counting, within the top 3 2D Zelda games. It manages to use the time travel mechanic more dynamically than Ocarina of Time or even Majora's Mask. The puzzles are absolutely ingenious, the switch hook is one of the most creative interpretations of the hookshot ever seen, the Cane of Samaria makes a grand return, and wonder of wonders, the story is actually halfway interesting. Like, for one, in my own playthrough, I chose to play Ages second, so that got the bulk of the Link story, but even without that, we have more prominent characters, a Terminator-ass plotline, and a villain who actually shows up more than twice. Add in what already works from the Oracle framework, and you have an incredible game with just a few big flaws. The limitations of the Game Boy Color are still quite a pain, especially with the GBA right around the corner. The rings may have fans, but honestly I'm not a big fan of the system myself, and while I think the game mostly has better items than Oracle of Seasons, let's be honest with ourselves, the mermaid suit sucks. Still, I think this is a fantastic game, and I can't wait until someone gives it a remake. Remember how I said I was reviewing the 3DS versions of the N64 games? Yes, Ocarina of Time 3D is better than Ocarina of Time. In other news, the Nintendo Switch is better than the Wii U. I won't waste too much of your time with this. Ocarina of Time 3D is significantly smoother, the boots are items now, the script is polished up, the ocarina itself is more convenient, and the game looks slightly better. Add that the bottom screen gives us a better map at most times and the addition of an extra item slot, and this is easily the definitive Ocarina of Time experience. So yeah, if you want to play Ocarina of Time, buy a 3DS and either do so before March 27th and hope you can connect your account there to a current Nintendo account, or pray you can find a physical copy somewhere. Good luck! It's funny to think that Link's Awakening is the most recent 2D Zelda game, but, well, that's what Switch remakes will do to you. Technically, Super Mario 64 was released more recently than Mario Odyssey. Is it fair to rank it higher than the other Game Boy games just because of this remake? I don't care, so I'm going to do it anyways. Link's Awakening is where the Zelda formula was truly born, and with this remake, it manages to stand toe-to-toe with modern entries in the series. The abundance of 2D sections, plus the unique world of Koholint Island, mean that even all these years later, the game still feels special. Add in some of the most creative 2D dungeons in the series, an incredibly unique story, and a few rare and fun items, and this is easily one of the best early games in the series. Still, it's undeniably still an early game, and if you're keeping track, isn't even my favorite 2D entry. I think the game's charm helps carry it past a few of its rockier moments, but that's obviously pretty subjective. Still, it's a remarkable game nonetheless, even if the remake's newer features leave something to be desired. Seriously, who actually cares about the chamber dungeons? Who? I'm always surprised people call Ocarina of Time the best game ever, considering how much better its sequel is. Majora's Mask is the third and final oddball direct sequel in the series, and it has earned its golden reputation. It's definitely one of the lighter games in the series, especially in terms of the main plot, and super especially compared to the other 3D games. Plus, I'm gonna be honest, the main Link gameplay isn't that much better compared to Ocarina of Time. However, what it does have is some of the most engaging side content seen in the series to this point, and a load of different gameplay styles worth sinking your teeth into. Like seriously, the masks alone add more than enough content to put this game on par with most of the other entries, if not superior. It is so easy to get distracted and waste a full 3-day cycle just because of all the side stuff you can do is so fun. So why is it only number 7? Well, for one, that main line really is small. There are only 4 main dungeons with a few mini dungeons throughout, but that's about it. Plus, having played every Zelda game with conventional dungeons, I can state with confidence that Great Bay Temple is, without contest, easily the worst dungeon in the entire franchise. Absolutely, worse than the Water Temple, worse than the Great Palace, worse than everything. It's just not fun, at all. And when that's a quarter of the dungeons in the full game, that's pretty damn important. Also, quite simply, I like the other games better, including, controversially... Oh boy, am I gonna get hate for this. Look, Majora's Mask 3D isn't perfect. Most of the redesigned bosses suck, a lot of the game's intentionally limiting features have been stripped back, and while I can enjoy the new Zora's Mask controls myself, it is undeniably less viscerally fun. Still, it's hard to deny, the game is in many ways an upgrade. The expanded Bomber's Notebook makes handling side quests easier, the streamlining, while making the game less unique, does make the game more convenient, and remember, all of the improvements to Ocarina of Time 3D carry over here too. Plus, if you're playing with a new 3DS or a Circle Pad Pro, you get right-stick camera control, which I'm never going to turn down. Look, I'm a shallow person and I can accept that. And so we find the final original 2D Zelda game, both for this list and, as of the present moment, for the main series. Is A Link Between Worlds really the best 2D game in the series? Well, clearly I think so. It's not only the most modern 2D entry that hasn't been remade, the game builds on top of what previous entries accomplished, both in terms of design and control. We have some of the most creative dungeons ever seen, a main pair of gimmicks that allow for freer exploration and progression, and items that are fine-tuned to the point of perfection. Like, if someone told me this was their absolute favorite Zelda game, I wouldn't be surprised. So why did it just barely break my top 5? Do I just hate 2D games? Well, let's ask my multiple playthroughs of New Super Mario Bros. U. The honest truth is, this game really is the perfect 2D Zelda, and I absolutely love it. But, quite honestly, I had more fun and a higher enjoyment of the remaining 4 titles. For 3 of them, it might just be novelty value. I haven't played them in years and had never beat them, compared to Link Between Worlds, which I've beaten multiple times before, but in general, I think the truth is, I just love them more overall. Still, if you want to get into the series 2D entries, I cannot recommend A Link Between Worlds enough. Definitely worth a play. Oh boy, this is difficult. Here's the thing. While my number 1 game, my absolute favorite Zelda game, is concrete and set in stone, and honestly has been for years, the next 3 all hold a very special place in my heart. They're all amazing titles, all deserving of being, if not the best, certainly the runner-up. And now I have to choose one I like the least. I'll say this right now. If you disagree with this or number 3, if either of these are your absolute favorite Zelda games, consider these an honorary second place. Choosing between them is honestly one of the hardest parts of this list, but I have to go with what my gut tells me. So, with that out of the way, let's try this again. The game everyone either loves for being mature or hates for being dark, and here I am loving Twilight Princess for being a fun video game. Shame on me, I guess. Seriously though, this is an absolutely incredible game. For a start, we have the start of truly complex combat within the Zelda series, thanks to the hero's shade. Seriously, getting good at the swordplay in Twilight Princess feels super satisfying, to the point where even sheathing your sword is an integral part of combat. The items are also absolute joy, including a sniper bow, bombs of multiple types, a massive fuck-off wrecking ball, a few incredibly situational but ridiculously entertaining toys, and everyone's favorite, the fishing rod. Even Ganondorf loves it. However, my absolute favorite part of the game has to be the dungeons. From the first actually entertaining water temple in the series, realistic homes that still act as incredibly fun dungeons, and even monkeys, this is easily my favorite set of dungeons in the entire series. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the dungeons in the remaining 3 entries, but even they don't have as high a density of sheer amazing dungeons like this game does. Could I do with a bit more variety in terms of the overworld? Sure. But this is still easily one of the most fun games in the series, especially with the HD version on Wii U. If you have the GameCube and Wii version, I can still highly recommend that, though I will say I find the Wiimote controls to be a bit underwhelming in that version. Still, none of that should hold this back from its place among the top of the top, and no, it's not too dark. Yeah, I know all the go-to jokes about Skyward Sword, and I'll admit, I don't think the Wii Motion Plus was as well utilized as it possibly could be. But hey, that's what we have the button controls and the Switch remake for, and holy cow, this game is amazing. We have 7 amazing dungeons, including an 8-piece 15 puzzle of dungeon rooms to get the Triforce, a time-shifting pirate ship filled with robots and a bow, and a water temple that takes you to literal hell instead of figurative hell. We have great items, including the totally not webs of the double claw shots, the super cathartic whip, and the absolutely ridiculous gust bellows. We have the best town in the series thus far in the form of Skyloft, with dozens of side quests and minigames, surprisingly fun characters that you can interact with, and the eyes. And we have one of the most engaging stories in the series, with Grouchy Ninja Lady, the Pompous Pompadour, Magic Evil Twink, and the first ever Zelda to actually be called Zelda. It's genuinely an amazing game, and it really is disappointing just how many people completely wrote it off for no good reason. It is a little disappointing that the game's regions are completely disconnected from each other, but that's really not any reason to completely write the game off. Plus, what kind of complaint is the game is linear? Like, okay, are all movies terrible because you had to experience them in one specific order? I mean, I haven't actually watched a movie in years, but you know what I mean. It's always weird going back to games from my childhood that I must have played hundreds of times and only beating them at age 23. Is Wind Waker the best Zelda game ever? Maybe not, but it comes pretty damn close. We have a huge ocean to explore with dozens of islands, treasures, secrets, and collectibles. We have a story that doesn't take itself too seriously, but still makes an effort to have genuinely emotional moments. We have a style and graphics and music that is absolutely timeless, made even more perfect by the HD remake. We have brilliant controls, great items, and simple but effective swordplay. We even have dungeons that are way better than people act like they are. This game is absolutely amazing, especially on the Wii U. Is it perfect? Not really. I mean, the majority of the world being water isn't exactly the best level design. The game is ultimately super easy, at least for any percent, and while I don't think difficulty is what makes games good, necessarily, I do also appreciate a decent challenge. And while I think the game is great, it's definitely, shall we say, economical with its content. Seriously, there are like 5 actual settlements, only 7 unique dungeons, and the final dungeon is basically just a boss rush, 2 puzzles, and then 2 more bosses. Still, for what's actually there, I think this is an amazing game. However, there's just one game that I can definitively say is better, and I think you all know what that game is. It's difficult to put into words just how much I love Breath of the Wild. This is, at least as far as I'm concerned, as close to a perfect Zelda game as is humanly possible. We have the exploration of Wind Waker, but without the empty space of the ocean. We have the wide open overworld of Twilight Princess, but with more variety and more to discover. We have the vast and diverse biomes of Skyward Sword, but all interconnected and deeply related. We have the puzzles of Oracle of Ages, the shifting world of Oracle of Seasons, the freedom of Zelda 1 and Link Between Worlds, the in-depth combat of Zelda 2, the post-apocalyptic world of Ocarina of Time, the dark themes of Majora's Mask. And on top of all of that, we have incredible variety in how we can solve puzzles, amazing diversity in items and weaponry, a physics system that is genuinely beautiful to mess with, the most atmospheric music I've ever heard, and some of the best scenery porn ever seen in a video game. This game is amazing, and I absolutely love it. But what do you think? What's your favorite Zelda game, and what's your least favorite? Leave your answers in the comments below, and thank you for watching.